بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. Yasin. These letters are one of the miracles of the Quran, and none but Allah knows their meaning. By the Quran full of wisdom, truly you are one of the messengers on the straight path, sent down by the Almighty, the Most Merciful, in order that you may warn a people whose forefathers were not warned, so they are heedless. Indeed, the word of punishment has proved true against most of them, so they will not believe. Verily, we have put on their necks iron collars reaching to their chins, so their necks are raised up. And we have put a barrier before them and a barrier behind them, and we have covered them up so they cannot see. It is the same to them whether you warn them or warn them not, they will not believe. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad.
Hasan ka zehar se टुकड़े जिगर हुआ सेपारा दिल काहों से ज़ेरो ज़बर हुआ सम का जो रूए पाक पा ज़ाहिर असर हुआ
हारुस इमाम पाक का इस दम दिगर हुआ इमाम पाक का इस दम दिगर हुआ
शिकम में खलल पड़ा
कट कर कलेजा तश्त के अंदर निकल पड़ा कलेजा तश्त के अंदर निकल पड़ा
तड़प दर्द दिल से तड़पने लगे इमाम सदमे से सब्ज होने लगा रोए सुर्ख फाम चिल्लाए हाथ से ये कलेजे को थाम थाम
दौड़ो बहन के काम हमारा हुआ तमाम बहन के काम हमारा हुआ तमाम
कहते कहते जर्द रुखे पाक हो गया
चिल्लाते थे कि हाय जिगर चाक हो थे कि हाय जिगर चाक हो गया
दौड़ी जनाब ज़ैनबे बेकस भरे न पा देखा के लौटते हैं बिछोने पे मुस्तफा बोली सर को पीट के वो गम की मुब्तला
है बहन सारो भाई ये क्या हुआ बहन सारो भाई ये क्या हुआ
फिर किसी ने ज़ेरे दगा से पिला दिया
किसने मेरे कलेजे पे खंजर चला दी मेरे कलेजे पे खंजर चला दिया
माते थे हसन के बुलाओ हुसैन को था दम बदम ये हुक्म के लाओ हुसैन को भाई का हाल ज़ार सुनाओ हुसैन को
ٹکڑے میرے جگر کے دکھاؤ حسین میرے جگر کے دکھاؤ حسین کو
کہہ دو کہ جلد آئیے رحلت کا وقت ہے
سن جائے کچھ آ کے وصیت کا وقت جائے کچھ آ کے وصیت کا وقت ہے
آئے حسین اتنے میں باچش میں اشک بار چلاتے تھے کہ آپ کی غربت کے میں نثار شب گلے کو چوم کے کہتے تھے بار بار
میں صدقے میرے نانا کے یادگار ان پہ صدقے میرے نانا کے یادگار
مجھے سے زیادہ ظلم و ستم تم پہ ہوئیں گے
ہم قبر میں تمہاری مصیبت پہ روئیں گے قبر میں تمہاری مصیبت پہ روئیں گے
یا تمہاری گود میں نکلے گا میرا دام تم دو گے ہم کو غسل و کفن جب مریں گے ہم ہوگا تمہارے پاس نہ کوئی بجوز علام
قاتل سرانے ہوئے گا یا خنجرے سے سرانے ہوئے گا یا خنجرے سے بعد مرگ بھی راحت سے سوئے گا تمہارا گھوڑوں سے پامال ہو تمہارا گھوڑوں سے پامال ہوئے گا
جگر سے غشوے شاہ فلک جناب غم کی تو تھے حسین ہوا اور اضطراب حاضر تھی روح احمدو زہرا ابو تراب
وہاں آسماں پہ ہو گئے باغ جنا کے آسماں پہ ہو گئے باغ جنا کے بعد تو مومنوں کے قضا کر گئے حسن کہ حسین ہوئے مر گئے کہ حسین ہوئے مر حسین ہوئے مر گئے حسن.
Jazakallah Brother Hadi for the beautiful recitation. Inshallah, before we invite Shaykh Mahdi to address the Mu'mineen, I wanted to go over a quick announcement about tomorrow night's program. Inshallah, tomorrow night we will commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Ali Reza alayhi salam. Inshallah, we will begin at 7:30 p.m. with the recitation of the Holy Quran and speech by, inshallah, Maulana Shaykh Haider Shirazi. We'll also have Matam, inshallah, tonight by Brother Hadi Kanani. With that, please help me begin the program with a loud salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Again, on the second night of our series, I want to take a moment to offer my condolences to the dear brothers and sisters on the shahadats, these three shahadats that we are going through: the wafat of the Prophet, the shahada of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, and the shahada of Ali ibn Musa al-Rada salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'een. We'll continue with the topic that we were discussing, which was the issue of relatives and how the Ahlul Bayt used to treat their relatives, and what this idea and concept of family in the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt used to look like. I won't go over what we discussed yesterday, just a quick point of what we touched upon. We talked about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used different terms to refer to the concept of family in the verses of the Quran. Sometimes it's dhawil qurba, sometimes it is al-arham, sometimes it is ahla, and we will cover more of those verses today. We talked about the reward of someone who does silatul rahim, and we also talked about how one is not allowed to cut off their family ties no matter who the person is that is their relative. We mentioned a hadith of a person who asked Imam al-Sadiq if their relative is not Muslim, can he cut off ties? And the Imam told him no. A person who asked, if my relative bothers me, can I cut off ties with him fully and completely? The Imam responded to him that he's not allowed to do that. Another person asked him, if he doesn't come from the same school of thought as me, can I cut off ties with this individual? And we found that Imam Sadiq also replied to this individual that this is not allowed. And therefore we talked about the punishment of the one who cuts off family ties. We also touched on this very critical point, that when we talk about maintaining family ties, that is one thing, but Islam has also allowed us and in fact recommended us to balance these relationships at the same time. Meaning that the person that I am spending time with amongst my relatives, it is not the case necessarily that I spend time with the same person, the same amount, each and every person in my family and my relatives, the same amount. This is not something that we have in Islam. You do have the right to manage and balance these relationships. What you are not allowed to do is to shut the door on that relationship completely and act as if you don't even know that person, act as if this person is a stranger. This is not allowed. But managing this relationship, if there's someone that I get along with more, I can spend more time with that person. Someone I get along with less, I can spend less time with that person. Someone who's more religious, their lifestyle matches with my lifestyle, I can spend more time with them. Someone who may not live their life like me, maybe I spend some less time with them. This is completely normal. And in fact, as we will discuss, it is something that Islam recommends. We also talked about how certain times Islam is very clear that an individual needs to set boundaries between himself and his relative. Sometimes you will come across a relative who's very bold, who sees within his own right and his own authority to interject into your life, to intervene into your life, to make decisions about your life. This is where you have to draw boundaries between yourself and that relative. Or, for example, you will find there are gatherings that the family has. These are gatherings that are not compatible with your lifestyle, they're not compatible with what Islam wants from you. This is where you can respectfully, and we will talk more about this today, set boundaries between yourself and your relatives so that they understand that you come from a different lifestyle and you may not want to take part in every gathering that they have when certain things are not taken into consideration. This is naturally where we end yesterday, and inshallah today we will move on with this topic, and I will pose a number of questions and hopefully we'll provide answers to them. The first question is this: how should I communicate with my relatives when there is a difference of lifestyle between myself and them? Number two, did the Prophet spend the same amount of time with the different relatives that he had? Or would he value certain relatives more than he would value other relatives? Do we see traces of this in his seerah and in his practice or not? Question number three, who were some of the relatives when it came to Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba who, instead of being there when Imam al-Hasan needed them the most, in fact turned into people who betrayed him and became a test for the Imam? Who were these individuals? Number four, can I choose a particular lifestyle just because my relatives do their life or live their life in a particular way? Can I use this as an excuse that because everyone in the family is doing this, therefore I will also do this as well? Number five, when the Quran speaks of an individual on the Day of Judgment, we know some people are given their books of deeds through their right hand, and the wrongdoers are given their books of deeds, behind their back. Why is it that this person is being given his book behind the back? What reason does the Quran mention, and how does this relate to his relatives? And number six, if someone lives in a family with his extended relatives, that most of them, maybe all of them, have turned away from him, either because they just don't like him, or because they don't like his lifestyle, or because he has made a change in his lifestyle. He is now becoming more of a practicing individual. Now people are turning away from him amongst his relatives. Who can this person rely on in these times to understand who his true relatives are? And in the verses of the Quran and in Hadith, who did the Ahlul Bayt and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduce to us as our true Rahim, who go beyond the basic, simple understanding of Rahim that we have been talking about? Tonight, inshallah, we'll take some time to delve into these questions and provide answers to them with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. The first point that we need to make clear before we continue with the discussion is this: anytime that I want to set boundaries with my relatives, anytime that I want to make it clear to them that this is a lifestyle that I have, the number one key, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is to be respectful in your approach. Specifically, if the boundaries that you are setting have to do with your Islamic lifestyle and your Islamic values. If the respect is not there, if you speak to them from a moral high horse, as we sometimes do, that yes, what you guys do, I'm not part of this stuff. Me, I'm different. I live a higher lifestyle. I live a loftier lifestyle. I live a more religious life. I'm more special than you guys. If this is the tone that you take, first of all, Islam does not agree with this. And second of all, it will backfire. No, this is not the approach that you take when you're setting boundaries. When you're setting boundaries and you're explaining to relatives that this is how I live my life, and you want their respect in return, then you need to show respect first and foremost. And this is mentioned in our ahadith as well, that the one who is a true follower of the Ahlul Bayt, everyone else looks at him as a role model. If you're the one in the family who's considered the more religious person, sometimes this happens in the family, people look, they say, well, this person is the person who's known for his religiosity, for his practicing of the religion. If you're like that, then your respect has to be at all-time high. The manners that you have to be at an all-time high. These are the things that are very, very critical. If you set boundaries without showing the utmost respect to your relatives, this is going to create problems. And Islam never wanted you to do that without respect either. Islam wants you to do it with the utmost respect. Now, if you do it with respect, and there are those who don't respect your decision, that's a separate discussion, and we will get to that later on a little bit. In the sense that you will have to rely on your true Rahim to be on your side, and we'll talk about who that is. But the reality is that as it relates to you, you have to show the utmost respect and manners. As we mentioned in the hadith of the Imam says that the Shia, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, they are the ones who in the family, nobody knows anyone else who is more God-fearing than them. Nobody knows anybody else who's more of a role model than them. If you're the religious one in the family, then I hope that people look at you and they see you as a role model. Hopefully they don't look at you and say, yes, this one says he's the more religious one, but when you look at his akhlaq is so terrible. If your akhlaq is not the best of akhlaq, then you being the most religious in the family is going to create more problems at times than it's going to solve any problems. If you don't have the best of akhlaqs, then maybe tone down the talk about religion amongst your relatives, because it's only going to push your relatives further away. This is not just you and me. The Quran tells the Prophet salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi, Ya Rasulullah, you, the Prophet, who brought about this message that is the most divine message that we've ever heard of, that mankind has ever heard of. Yet the Quran tells the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, if you didn't have the proper akhlaq, still people wouldn't have listened to you. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ, if you had a hard heart, if you didn't have the proper akhlaq, people wouldn't care what you have to say. Say, this is the Prophet, let alone someone like us. If I don't have the proper akhlaq, then what am I expecting of my relatives to respect my boundaries? No, you have to show the utmost respect, the utmost manners, and the utmost respect for them. And in return, hopefully, you will receive that respect as well. This is when it comes to setting boundaries. We said that Islam recommends us to do such a thing. We talked about this yesterday. Sometimes you'll find people, they will ruin their whole life because of a relative. Because this relative might say this. Because this relative might think this. Because this relative might do this. Well, you have values yourself. You have your own lifestyle. With respect, you have the permission from Islam to disagree with someone else's lifestyle. And along these lines, and we talked about this yesterday, is balancing and managing your relationships. Someone says, well, there's a person in our family that's difficult to get along with. They're negative, or maybe they're not very religious, or maybe we just can't connect with one another. Does that mean I have to spend the same amount of time with this person that I'm spending with everybody else in our family? The answer is no, not necessarily. You keep the door open to your relationship. Don't cut off that relationship. But with some people, your relationship will be a closer one. With someone else, there might be a little bit of distance. When you look at the seerah of the Prophet, you find that he valued his members of the family. He valued his relatives based on the value that they had. It wasn't the case that just because you're a relative of the Prophet, he will spend time with you and he will be with you just as much as he is with others. No. When you look at the Prophet and you look at Ali ibn Abi Talib, you find that with Ali ibn Abi Talib, he is spending so much time with him. And this is mentioned in the khutbahs and in the hadiths of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Later on, when he wanted to explain to the other ashab and the other companions and the tabi'een and those who had come after the ashab that, listen, you weren't around when I was spending so much time with the Prophet, he was explaining this. He says, I had an appointment with the Prophet. I had times where I would go and sit with the Prophet once in the morning, once at nighttime. And he says, everybody knows that the Prophet would not spend that much time with anybody else. Relative or non-relative, doesn't matter. He would not spend that much time with anybody else. I was the one who spent the most time with the Prophet. He says, sometimes I would go to his house, sometimes he would come to my house. When I would go to his house, sometimes akhlani. He would make the house khali, he would make the room khali, meaning that he wanted to sit and talk to me only. And so he would ask the others to leave. وَأَقَامَ عَنِّي نِسَاءَهُ. And sometimes he would ask his wives to leave that room and go to another room. He would spend time with me like this. And then he beautifully says, but when the Prophet used to come to my house, he never asked for Fatima and Hasan and Hussein to leave. He would ask them to stay. And then Ali ibn Abi Talib says, day in and day out, I used to meet with the Prophet. We used to sit together. He used to share. I used to ask him questions. He used to provide answers to my questions. وَإِذَا سَكَتْتُ. And whenever I was done and I was quiet and my questions were done, then the Prophet would start the discussion with me and he would speak to me. And Ali ibn Abi Talib says, because of this, there is no verse of the Quran unless that I know how it was revealed and when it was revealed. and I know the ta'wil of it as well. So you find that the Prophet, he is selective in who he spends time with. Though he has relationships with everybody in his family, some relationships are more valuable to him. Some relationships, he might be keeping a little bit of distance with this individual. This might be the case, there's no problem. Doesn't mean that the Prophet wouldn't welcome that person. Doesn't mean that the Prophet wouldn't be having good akhlaq with that person, respect that person, help that person when that person is in need. But you don't see also the Prophet spending the same amount of time with everybody. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So this is one principle that we understand. The second principle that we also understand in this regard is that when the relatives would hurt the Prophet, when the relatives would say things that were detrimental to the message of the Prophet, but after a while there was an opportunity for them to come back to the right path, you find that the Prophet was extremely forgiving when it came to his relatives. And this is another principle that we understand about our relatives. That as much as you are forgiving when it comes to strangers, when it comes to your relatives, if they apologize and they come back, then you have to be even more forgiving towards them. Because this person is not only a believer, he is now a relative of yours as well. You find this in Fath Makkah. In Fath Makkah, which happened in the 8th year after Hijrah, they say the Prophet, he had his whole army march in front of Abu Sufyan. And one of these companions of the Prophet, he was riding ahead of the Prophet. And he passed by Abu Sufyan. He said, Ya Abu Sufyan, al-yawm yawmul malhama. Today is the day where we get revenge for everything that we've done. And then when this army moved on, and then the Prophet came across Abu Sufyan asked him, he said, this companion of yours said, Al-yawm yawmul malhama, is today the day you're going to take the life of all of us? And then the Prophet said, no, he was wrong. Al-yawm yawmul marhama, today is the day of mercy. Today is the day of forgiveness. And we read in history, the Prophet gathered Quraysh. These are all his cousins. These are all his relatives that have been opposing him for years and years. He gathered Quraysh in front of him and he asked them, he said, what do you think I would do with you? They all said, Ya Rasulullah, you are the most forgiving. You are the most kind. You have the right to punish us, but we know that you will not do that. And the Prophet said, I will do upon you the same that the brothers of Yusuf did, or Yusuf did upon his brothers. La tathriba alaykum al-yawm yaghfirullahu lakum. There is no blame upon you. I will forgive you. These were people who for 20 plus years were opposing the Prophet, killing his companions, torturing his companions. But because they came back to the right path, some of them at least, you find that the Prophet forgave them. This is the forgiveness of the Prophet. And if the Prophet can forgive someone who was opposing him for 20 years, I can forgive someone who was opposing me for 2 years or 3 years. I can oppose someone of my relatives who said something bad about me. If he comes, he asks for apology, he asks for forgiveness, then I can forgive this individual. When you look in the seerah of Imam al-Hasan, you find that in the relatives of Imam al-Hasan, there were those who were very much the allies of Imam al-Hasan, and then you also find those who were very much people who Imam al-Hasan relied on, but they betrayed him. And this was amongst the tests of Imam al-Hasan. It's a difficult test where you rely on your relative and then your relative is not there and your relative turns away and they betray you. What happened with the relative of Imam al-Hasan? We know that when Imam al-Hasan came to power, this was after Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib had become shaheed already. And he was martyred, and then Imam al-Hasan came into power. When he came into power, he was dealing with a situation already where Muawiyah was now planning to take over Iraq. At that time, you had Sham, and you had Iraq, and you had the Arabian Peninsula. These were the three main areas of the Muslim empire at that time. Though there were other areas as well, but these were the three big chunks, if you want to describe them in that way. And Sham, of course, was in the hands of Muawiyah, and Iraq, of course, was a very flourishing area to have, and Muawiyah wanted it. And so Imam al-Hasan, when he came into this situation, this was after Ali ibn Abi Talib for years had already been asking his people to come to put together an army to defend themselves against Muawiyah. So Imam al-Hasan comes into this situation. And he has to put together an army so that they can go up against Muawiyah. When you read history, you find that Imam al-Hasan came into Kufa. He delivered a khutbah for people. The narration says, as much as Imam al-Hasan asked for help, everyone was quiet. Not one person got up. Until one of his companions got up and called his own tribe, and another one, and another one. They say that from the tribes of Kufa, enough people got together that the number of this army reached 12,000 people. The Imam sent this army towards Muawiyah's army just to go and stop the movement of Muawiyah's army. He told them, you go there, stop there, and wait there until I get there. Now the discussion was, who was he going to appoint as the commander of this army? This army that it's been so difficult for him to put together. Who did he put in charge of this army? He put his own cousin in charge of this army. He put an individual by the name of Ubaydullah ibn Abbas. This Ubaydullah ibn Abbas is the brother of the famous companion Abdullah ibn Abbas. He's a cousin. He's the son of Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet. He took Ubaydullah. So Ubaydullah, relative of his, someone you can trust. And even more so, Muawiyah, they say, had killed the children of Ubaydullah in a raid in Yemen. Not himself, a commander of his had done this. And so this was added reason to have Ubaydullah in charge. So Ubaydullah ibn Abbas takes this army and they go and they stand in front of the army of Muawiyah. And Imam al-Hasan is in Madain. He's somewhere else. And then what happens? They say one day, the army of Imam al-Hasan, they got together. They got up in the morning to recite their Fajr prayer as long as they waited. And as much as they waited for Ubaydullah ibn Abbas to come and lead the prayer, all of a sudden they saw Ubaydullah isn't coming. What happened? Muawiyah gave him an offer that if you come and you join us, we will give you 1,000,000 dirhams. A lot of money. And this cousin of Imam al-Hasan, what did he do? He joined Muawiyah overnight. Imagine how Imam al-Hasan feels betrayed by his own relatives. This is not a stranger. This is your cousin. And you find Imam al-Hasan is betrayed in this way. And Imam al-Hasan had appointed other commanders that if something happened to Ubaydullah ibn Abbas, the next commander would come in charge, and then the next commander would come in charge. But the problem that took place is when Ubaydullah joined the army of Muawiyah, they say half or 2/3 of the army of Imam al-Hasan also joined the army of Muawiyah. From this 12,000, maybe 4,000, maybe 5,000 are left for Imam al-Hasan. This is a test. Imam al-Hasan was tested in this way with his relatives. It's difficult, and sometimes we are tested with our relatives, not in this way, in much smaller ways. But sometimes we are tested as well with our relatives. And when we look at the tests of the Ahlul Bayt, this is a sign for us that if I'm tested with my relatives, then let me be patient. Let me understand that this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we mentioned, the test of the Prophet with his relatives yesterday, with Abu Lahab, this man who would turn down the Prophet, who would oppose the Prophet, maybe like no other individual that you would find at that time. These are tests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in our lives. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum. Up until now, we were discussing how a relative is someone that you have to maintain your ties with. You do not have the right to turn away from them. Then on the other side, you will find another extreme. This other extreme is this. This is for individuals who now give too much value to their relatives. And this happens in different ways. The Quran refers to this concept where you give too much value to your relatives as sometimes as hamiyya and sometimes more so as asabiyya. Asabiyya meaning that you will get behind your relative, you will get behind this person who is part of your family or more so part of your tribe. No matter what he is doing, whether he's right or he's wrong, you're behind him. You will support him whether he's doing something that's okay or something that is haram. It doesn't matter for you. Just as long as this person is your relative. The Quran refers to this. The ahadith refer to this al-asabiyya as well. The Imam was asked, the fourth Imam, about asabiyya. What is this asabiyya? What is this tribalism that you speak about? And racism kind of falls within the same category, slightly different, but kind of within the same category. And the Imam said this, he said, asabiyya, tribalism, is that you look amongst your relatives and you consider the worst of your relatives better than the good people of other tribes. Because it doesn't matter for you the value and the merit of this individual. It doesn't matter for you what this person does. The only thing that matters for you is what? Is that this person is my relative. And this was a severe problem and continues to be a severe problem in our communities, brothers and sisters. Why? Because one of those ways that this asabiyya shows itself, one of those ways that me just getting behind my relatives, no matter what they're doing, no matter if they're right, they're wrong, doesn't matter. No matter if they are being oppressed or they are the oppressors. For me, it doesn't matter. I'm always going to be behind my relatives. One of the places when my relative is doing something wrong, my relative, I will. This is not a concept that we have in Islam. This was something Islam was trying to eradicate. At that time, this was a serious problem for the Prophet. Why? Because at that time, this culture was there amongst the Arab that if a relative of yours asks you for support, you support them no matter what. It doesn't matter what they're right, wrong, they killed a person, didn't do that. It doesn't matter. You get behind them. We know in history, Aus and Khazraj, these two tribes that were in Medina, we know in Mecca was Quraysh and in Medina was Aus and Khazraj. Aus and Khazraj, they fought together for years. Why? Because when one person from this tribe was hurt, then all of a sudden everyone from that tribe was fighting with everybody from the other tribe. And this is something that Islam put aside. Islam said, no, you can't do this. Just because your relative calls you, this is something that they used to do. Yes, kind of like gangs that we have today. They used to go into the neighborhood of another tribe, and if they were hurt, for example, or maybe if they weren't even hurt, but they wanted to create a conflict, then they would call their tribe. And their tribe was responsible to show up for them. If one of them called for the help of the tribe, everybody from the tribe should show up. And everybody from the tribe should support what this relative is doing. Islam was never a fan of this. And this is what you have in our communities today, brothers and sisters. There is a dispute, an argument. And because this person is my relative, I'm always going to agree with him. Who told you that you're supposed to do things in that way? Just because he's my relative? This person is hurting another person. They're saying hurtful comments about another person. But no, I can't disagree with it because this person is my relative. Something we see back home, and then unfortunately it's made its way into our communities here as well. That because this person is my cousin, I will support whatever he says. But brother, he's wrong. Look what he did. Look what he said. No, it doesn't matter. He's my relative, so I'm just going to take whatever he has to say. That's not how it works. Verses of the Quran tell us, says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. And this is specifically when it comes to bearing witness to something. This is something we deal with in our community. Something has happened. You know your relative is wrong. But because it's your relative, then you change the facts. Then you explain things in a different way. Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kunu qawwamina bil qisti shuhada'a lillah. When you come, you want to bear witness to a situation, or you want to give, your witness, and you want to explain what you saw. Kunu qawwamina bil qist. Tell the truth. Be just. And then the Quran says this. Maybe because the Quran knows exactly what we deal with. وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ. Even if your understanding and the witnessing that you are doing goes against what you yourself wants, or your parents want, or your relatives want. And I'm mostly concerned with the relatives right now. I know my relative is wrong, but then because they're my relative, I just get behind them and I support them at any cause. This is not what you have in Islam. Islam doesn't agree with this. Just because this person is my relative. Now, yes, how you bring this up to your relative, how you share this with them, that you may not agree with their approach, or because you think that they are wrong, you have to be very careful, and this is a very sensitive issue, and you have to be very tactful in this regard. But at the very least, if you know your relative is hurting someone, you know your relative is in the wrong, they're violating the rights of, you can't get behind this, you can't support this all of a sudden, that yes, because this is my relative. And let me take it a step further. Because this person is my spouse, for example, you don't have that right. If this person has hurt other people, and you know the truth, you were there, for example, you know what happened, then you can't support them just because. Otherwise, where is Islam then? Where are the teachings of Islam anymore? I don't have the right to get behind them. This was one of the biggest tests that the companions of the Prophet had to go through. And this is why you will find multiple verses of the Quran telling us, O mu'minun, if your father or your uncle or your aunts or your children or aw ashiratakum or your tribe, if they all turn away from Allah, don't take them as your awliya. Do not take them as your allies. Don't be on their side just because they're your relative. If that's what you choose, then wait, for the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to come. Verses of the Quran tell us, قُلْ إِن كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ أَوْ أَبْنَاؤُكُمْ أَوْ إِخْوَانُكُمْ أَوْ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ. Tell them if their fathers and their children and their brothers and their spouses وَعَشِيرَتُكُمْ and their tribes are more valuable to them than actually doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them, then tell them فَتَرَبَّصُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهَ بِأَمْرِهِ. Then tell them to wait until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows them how they will not be victorious. It's either you take the side of your relative when you know your relative is wrong, or you take the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the way you do this, and I'm emphasizing this again, you have to be very careful and cautious and tactful. But at the very least, I cannot support my relative when they are hurting another individual. I cannot support my relative when I know my relative is creating problems, when I know my relative is violating the rights of, at least I can't get behind them and support them. At least I can't do that. This was a test for the Muslimin at that time. This is why you find all of Quraysh, these battles that Ali ibn Abi Talib had with Quraysh, all the years that the Prophet was in Medina, they were, the battles that the Prophet had, because they all started in Medina, and the first one of them, of course, was Badr, and then the other ones, the first big one, of course, was Badr, and then all the other ones. During this whole time where Ali ibn Abi Talib was fighting on behalf of the Prophet, who was he fighting? Was he fighting strangers? No, he was fighting his own relatives. These were all from the tribe of Quraysh. They all knew who Ali ibn Abi Talib, they all knew who Abu Talib was. These were the same people, some, who had come to Abu Talib before and said, Abu Talib, why don't you ask your nephew to stop his message? And the Prophet responded, he said, if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left hand, I will never turn away from this. These were the same people that Ali ibn Abi Talib had to go up against. And when the Prophet had passed away, you find in some of the khutbahs of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he mentions this, that when we used to fight alongside the Prophet, we were fighting alongside the Prophet, and the other side was many of our brothers, many of our cousins, many of our uncles. This was not an easy test for the Muslims. This is a difficult test. And how does this apply to our lives today, brothers and sisters? This applies to our lives today, brothers and sisters, because today you will find yourself sometimes in a little bit of peer pressure. Everyone in the relatives and the family is doing something that is haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not allowed it. And you're sitting there and you're saying, should I be on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or should I just do it just because all of my relatives are now doing it? Do you feel a pressure that's there? Yes? This is difficult. But I tell you what, brothers and sisters, and this is one reminder for myself and for all of us, that if I disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of these relatives that I have, the verses of the Quran have made it very clear to us. On the day of judgment, وَيَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ فِي الصُّورِ فَلَا أَنْسَابَ بَيْنَهُمْ وَلَا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. On that day, none of your relatives are going to show up to answer for you and me. None of your relatives are going to say, Ya Allah, forgive this person. He did this sin because of me, so please forgive him. No, the relatives won't even show up there. The Quran says on that day, وَلَا يَسْأَلُ حَمِيمٌ حَمِيمًا. No close friend, and this includes relatives, no person who's close with another person cares to even ask how the other person is doing. Nobody cares. And then the Quran beautifully says, Surah Al-Ma'arij, يُبَصَّرُونَهُمْ. On that day, we have them see one another. It's not like they don't see one another and that's why they don't ask about one another. They see one another, but on that day, they are willing to give up their whole relatives just to not deal with the punishment of the day of judgment. And this is the other extreme, where I take and I give my relatives so much value that I will do haram because my relatives want this from me, or because all of my relatives are doing this, or because this is how my family does things. No, we don't have that permission, because on the day of judgment, that excuse is not going to fly. On the day of judgment, I can't come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and tell him, Ya Allah, I did this because everybody in the family was doing this. No, I have my own choice. I have my own ikhtiyar. I have my own free will. I have to decide how I'm going to live my life, because I have to then answer for how I'm going to live my life. This is another test that we have. And when you look at the verses of the Quran, when they talk about the group of people on the Day of Judgment, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them their books behind their backs, through their left hand naturally, gives them their books behind their backs, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, إِنَّهُ كَانَ فِي أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا. This is the person who used to do wrong things, but when he was amongst his relatives would cheer him on. They would encourage him. He was just doing what everybody else amongst the relatives was doing. But today, the relatives are nowhere to be found. Where are the relatives who were cheering you on that day? They're not there anymore. I have to respond for this. Moving on to the last question, as I'm running out of time. Moving on to the last question that we will discuss for tonight, inshallah, and that is this. If I find myself in a position where I find that many of my relatives have turned away from me, maybe because of my lifestyle, for example. At times you will find, for example, brothers and sisters who are reverts and they enter into the religion of Islam, they will be dealing with this situation sometimes where their relatives turn away from them. They feel isolated and they feel like there's no one else to be around. There's no one else. And of course, our communities have not done a good job of solving this problem either. It's a topic for another time. But whether I'm a revert or not, whether I'm a religious person amongst my relatives, and because of that, my relatives, many of them might have turned away from me, or some of them might have turned away from me, then where are these relatives? Who am I supposed to rely on? Who am I supposed to get strength from? Who am I supposed to get support from? This is here, brothers and sisters, where we now go from the basic understanding of Rahim to now a deeper understanding of Rahim. Because there's multiple meanings for this concept of Rahim. There is a basic understanding of it, which means to the relatives that we were talking about. And in the ahadith and in the fatawa of the maraji', there's naturally more emphasis on those who are related to you through birth than they are related to you through marriage. But the recommendations that Islam has would cover both sides of the family. This is the basic understanding of Rahim. But then when you go to Quran and Ahlul Bayt, then they tell you, listen, yes, that Rahim is true. That's not wrong or false or anything like that. That's true. They have those rights. But at the same time, you have a deeper Rahim as well. Who is this deeper Rahim? Pay attention, because this is a delicate point. The deeper Rahim are not those who are connected and related to you based on what society decides. They are those who are connected and related to you based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides. They are those who are related to you because they are actually more like you. Your relationship with them is a true relationship. It is not a relationship that has to do with the fact that you have the same last name. It's not a relationship that has to do with you being born from the same ethnicity, in the same city, in the same country. It's not that. That's Rahim, and there's part of that, like your relatives and coming from the same womb and all of that. That's part of it. That's the basic understanding of it. This Rahim are those who are related to you, and you are related to them because of who you truly are. Who are these? You are a believer, aren't you? You are a person who has faith. Then your Rahim becomes those who have faith, and you are more connected to those who have more faith. This is your true Rahim. The true believers, and beyond all of the true believers, then comes the Ahlul Bayt. And this is why we find in the ahadith, the Prophet and Ali ibn Abi Talib, or the Prophet about Ali ibn Abi Talib, he had said, أَنَا وَعَلِيٌّ أَبَوَا هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ. We are the fathers of this ummah. This is the true Rahim. Verses of the Quran were revealed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded the believers to maintain their family ties. The narrator came to Imam al-Sadiq. He asked Imam al-Sadiq, said, Ya Imam al-Sadiq, Ya Ja'far ibn Muhammad, what is this? الَّذِينَ يَسِرُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَن يُوصَلْ. Those who maintain the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked them to be maintained. And in some ahadith, the Imam said, these are your relatives. And then in other ahadith, he said, this is Rahimu ala Muhammad. This is that connection you have with the Ahlul Bayt. And then beautifully, the Imam adds this line, and he says, don't be amongst those who comes across the verses of the Quran and says it only has one meaning. No, it has the basic understanding, the rahim, the relatives that you have, but at a deeper level, at a deeper layer, then your rahim becomes who? It becomes those who are faithful, and amongst the greatest of them, of course, the Ahlul Bayt, who are at the very top of it. That's why the beautiful hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib says, رُبَّ أَخٍ لَمْ تَلِدْهُ أُمُّكِ. How many brothers there are that you have, how many brothers you have that your mother never gave birth to. Meaning that he is a brother of yours. He might even be closer than a brother to you, but not from the same mother or father necessarily. But this is your true rahim. And this is where we understand this famous line of the Prophet salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi and some of the other Imams, that he turned to Salman. This Salman who apparently had none of his relatives. He was neither from Quraysh, he was neither from the Muhajirin, he was neither from Ansar, he was not from any of these groups. And because of that, he didn't have any backing, he didn't have any relatives around him, he wasn't part of any of these groups. And the Prophet said, Salmanu minna ahlal bayt. He says, Salman is from us. That's where his true rahim is. And the companion of the sixth Imam says, I came and I asked the sixth Imam, I said, Ya Ja'far ibn Muhammad, you always speak highly of Salman. You always say these great things about Salman. Why is it that you say so many great things about Salman al-Farisi? He says, the sixth Imam corrected me immediately. He said, don't say Salman al-Farisi. Say Salman al-Muhammadi. That's truly who he is connected to. That's truly who he is related to. So if all of the family members of yours turn away from you, know that you have family members. You have true family members, and that is your true rahim, who are the true faithful believers and the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi. And speaking of the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet, let us take our hearts to the city of Medina, where our beloved Imam al-Hasan, during these days and nights that he has been poisoned with the poison that his wife has given to him, with the works of Muawiyah, with the encouragement of Muawiyah, at the command of Muawiyah. Now the narrations say that the body of Imam al-Hasan was now going through a more difficult time and a more difficult situation, and things were becoming more and more difficult. The narrator says, I came and I sat with Imam al-Hasan. The moment I sat with Imam al-Hasan, I wanted to be harsh with him, and I wanted to blame him that you gave away, the Khilafah, and you signed this peace treaty, and you did this and you did that. And of course the Imam did not give away the Khilafah, but this is how some of the people were looking at it, that you gave everything away to Muawiyah. Then he says, the moment I started to yell at Imam al-Hasan, then he started to cough. And the more he coughed, then all of a sudden I saw the more blood was coming out of the throat of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba. And he turned to me. He said, I didn't give away anything. It was because of companions like you who betrayed me in the difficult moments. This is why I am in this position. He says, I sat there as Imam al-Hasan, he turned more and more pale and pale until a point came where then I had to leave. And they say Imam al-Hussein came and sat by the body of Imam al-Hasan to say goodbye in those final moments, to say his farewell in those final moments. Ya Imam al-Hussein, at least on this day, you have the opportunity to say goodbye to your relative. You have the opportunity to say goodbye to your loved one. On the 10th of Muharram, your sister Zainab will not have an opportunity to say goodbye to your body. As much as Zainab comes to find the body of Hussein, there are so many wounds on the body of Hussein. The head has been removed from his body. It's so difficult for Zainab to find the body of Hussein on the 10th of Muharram. You can imagine, as much as Zainab wanted to be with Hussein in those final moments, you find Hussein does not have this opportunity. He is in the plains of Karbala. He is struggling in his own blood, and none of his relatives are there. Zainab and the women and the children, they are watching from the tents as their beloved father, this beloved Imam, is struggling in his blood. And all they know is that Dhul Janah all of a sudden came back, and there was blood on Dhul Janah, and they knew that Hussein is no longer coming back. Imagine the pain running through the heart of Zainab, through the heart of Sukaina, through the heart of Kulthum, and the other children, knowing that their father Hussein is never coming back after this. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He hastens the return of our beloved 12th Imam bin Nabi wa alih, rahimallahu man qara al-Fatihata ma'a as-salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم.
بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. زہر سے ٹکڑے جگر خون سے کفن لال ہوا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. زہر سے ٹکڑے جگر خون سے کفن لال ہوا وحسن سبز قبا. گلتے ہوئے بھائی کو بہن نے دیکھا اور تڑپ کر یہ کہا تیری غربت پہ بھائی تیری زینب ہو فدا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. ماں کے دکھ سے اب آزاد کہاں تھی زینب. ہو گیا کیسا غضب باپ زندہ نہ رہا بھائی سوئے خلد گیا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. کر دیا زہر علا غلے جگر کے ٹکڑے اور کاسر کے لیے کم سنی میں ہے یہ غم شام غریبا جیسا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. گھر سے ایک بار جنازہ جو نکل جاتا ہے کب وہ پھر آتا ہے. ایسا تابوت ہے یہ لوٹ کے جو گھر آیا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. شین اس وقت جو غازی کو نہ روکا ہوتا حشر ہو جاتا بپا. تیر آتے نہ جنا زے پہ تمہارے مولا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. بے خطا مار گیا سبت رسول دوسرا وحسن سبز قبا. شیخ و ریحان برادر کا جگر یاد آیا
जब सरे करब बला, जब सरे करब बला, टुकड़े कासिम के उठाते हुए मौला ने कहा, वहाँ हसन सब्ज कबा, बेखता मार गया सिबते रसूल दो सरा, वहाँ हसन सब्ज कबा, जहर से टुकड़े जिगर खून से कफन लाल हुआ, वाह हसन सब्ज कबा.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء يا سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليك يا قمر بني هاشم يا أبو الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا أم المصائب يا زينب بنت أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء يا علي بن موسى رضا راضي بالقدر والقضاء. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. يا سيدي أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.